The ache of loneliness had a particular sound in my life. It was the whisper of the wind off the water, a sound that should have been peaceful but always felt like a reminder of something missing. It was the hum of the ancient fluorescent lights in the print shop where I spent my days, a monotonous buzz that sank into my bones. Most of all, it was the silence in my tiny apartment, a space so small that the quiet felt amplified, pressing in from all four walls. I had arranged my life into a series of predictable, manageable routines, a fortress built of habit to keep the bigger, messier feelings at bay. But some things always found a way through the cracks. One of those things was Arthur Vance. He wasn't a person I knew, not really. He was more of a landmark, a fixed point in the shifting tides of our small coastal town. He owned Vance Marine, the sprawling boatyard that was the town's biggest employer and its quiet heart. He was older than me, maybe by 20 or 25 years, with a stillness about him that seemed as natural as the granite cliffs lining the shore. I'd see him walking the docks in the early morning, his hands in the pockets of a worn canvas jacket, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if he were reading a language only he understood. My own routine often intersected with his, at a distance. My walk home from the print shop always took me along the waterfront. It was the longest route, but it was the only part of my day that felt expansive. I'd watch the fishing boats come in, their decks slick with silver scales and salt water. I'd watch the sleek pleasure yachts bobbing in their slips, their polished chrome winking in the late afternoon sun. And I would watch him. He was often there, overseeing some small repair, speaking in a low voice to one of his crew, or simply standing aboard his own boat, a beautiful classic sailboat named the Starlight. He never seemed to notice me. I was just another anonymous shape against the backdrop of the harbor, and that was how I preferred it. To be seen would be to be known, and to be known was a risk I hadn't been willing to take in a long time. Not since leaving everything behind 2 years ago, packing my life into a car that was already on its last legs and driving until the road ran out at the edge of the ocean. I'd been running from a bad ending, a relationship that had hollowed me out, and I'd built this quiet, solitary life as a form of self-preservation. But solitude has a way of sharpening your vision for the things you lack. Watching Arthur Vance, I felt a strange and persistent yearning. It wasn't just attraction, though there was that. He had a rugged, understated handsomeness, the silver dusting his dark hair at the temples, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun, the confident set of his shoulders. It was more than that. It was the competence, the quiet authority. He belonged to this place, to the sea and the wood and the wind, in a way I never could. He was anchored, and I was adrift. In my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license, I kept a small, faded photograph. I'd found it one windy afternoon, skittering across the boardwalk near his slip. It was a picture of a sailboat, its sails full against a fiery sunset. It wasn't his boat, but it could have been. The image was anonymous, yet it felt intensely personal. Picking it up felt like stealing a secret, a glimpse into a world of quiet beauty that I could only observe from the outside. I should have thrown it away, but I couldn't. It became my talisman, a small, foolish symbol of a connection that existed only in my head. That was my life, a quiet loop of work, walking, and watching. It was safe. It was lonely. And it was about to be completely upended by the mundane death of a 4-cylinder engine. My car gave up the ghost on a Tuesday morning, halfway to work. It made a sound like a bag of wrenches being dropped down a flight of stairs, shuddered violently, and then went silent. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. I knew, with a certainty that settled like a cold stone in my stomach, that this was it. This was the final, fatal breakdown. The tow truck driver confirmed it, shaking his head with a practiced sympathy that didn't quite mask his professional boredom. The repair estimate he quoted was a number so far beyond my reach it might as well have been the distance to the moon. I left the garage on foot, the mechanic's words echoing in my head. "Scrap it, son. It'll cost you more to fix than it's worth." He was right, of course. The car was worth nothing. But it was my nothing. It was my freedom, my means of getting to the job that barely paid my rent, my escape vehicle if the walls of my life ever started closing in too tightly. Now, I was truly stuck. Defeated, I decided to take a shortcut home. My usual waterfront path felt too exposed, too beautiful for the ugly mood I was in. I ducked down a side street, following a high fence that I knew eventually bordered the back of the marina. I was looking for a gate, a path, anything to shorten the miserable walk. That's when I saw it. A section of the chain-link fence that was pulled back just enough for a person to squeeze through. It looked like a shortcut used by employees. Without a second thought, I slipped through the gap. I immediately knew I'd made a mistake. This wasn't a path. It was the heart of the boatyard, a place the public never saw. I was standing in a canyon of giants. All around me, massive yachts and sailboats rested on wooden cradles, their hulls looming over me like the ribs of sleeping whales. The air was thick with the smells of fiberglass, varnish, and low tide. The ground was a maze of power cables, discarded tarps, and scaffolding. There was no clear path, just narrow, shadowed lanes between the boats. I was trespassing, and I was lost. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of my exhaustion. Every direction I turned looked the same. A wall of white hull, a tangle of ropes, the dark underside of another vessel. The sounds of the main marina were muffled here, distant. I felt small and utterly out of place. I tried to retrace my steps, but the gap in the fence was gone, swallowed by the confusing geometry of the dry-docked boats. I was turning in circles. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind me, low and calm, without a trace of alarm. It wasn't the angry shout of a security guard I'd been expecting. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was him, Arthur Vance. He was standing not 20 feet away, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He wore dark work trousers and a simple gray Henley that stretched across his broad shoulders. He wasn't looking at me with anger or suspicion. His expression was one of mild curiosity, his head tilted slightly. His eyes, a deep shade of blue-gray like the ocean just before a storm, were steady and assessing. I'm sorry. I stammered, my face flushing with heat. I took a wrong turn. I was trying to cut through. "I'm lost," he nodded slowly, his gaze taking in my worn-out work clothes and the defeated slump of my shoulders. He didn't press for more details. He didn't make me feel like a criminal. He just accepted my explanation. "It happens," he said. "This place can be a labyrinth if you don't know it. The main gate is this way." He turned and started walking, not waiting to see if I would follow, simply assuming I would. I hurried to catch up, feeling like a stray dog being led to safety. We walked in silence for a moment, the crunch of our shoes on the gravel the only sound. He moved with an easy, unhurried grace, completely at home in this world of industrial machinery and maritime craftsmanship. As we neared the main gate, he glanced over at me. "You look like you've had a rough day." It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact. Something about his directness, the lack of pity in his voice, made me answer honestly. "My car died," I said, the words feeling small and pathetic in the open air. "For good this time." He grunted, a sound of understanding. "That's a tough break." We reached the gate, and he gestured toward the parking lot beyond. His truck, a clean but unassuming dark blue pickup, was parked near the office. "Where do you live? I can give you a ride." I was stunned into silence for a second. "A ride? From Arthur Vance?" "Oh, no, you don't have to do that. I can walk. It's not far." He stopped and turned to face me fully. The full weight of his presence was a tangible thing. He wasn't a large man, but he had a density, a centeredness, that made him seem to take up more space. "I'm heading out anyway," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's no trouble." Too tired and overwhelmed to refuse again, I just nodded. The cab of his truck was immaculate, smelling faintly of leather and coffee. There were no personal effects, just a set of rolled-up blueprints on the passenger seat, which he moved to the back without comment. The silence as he drove was comfortable, not awkward. He didn't ask prying questions or try to fill the space with small talk. He just drove, his large, capable hands resting easily on the steering wheel. I risked a sideways glance. In profile, his face was even more striking, the lines etched by time and weather telling a story of a life lived with purpose. When we pulled up in front of my shabby apartment building, I fumbled for the door handle, a fresh wave of embarrassment washing over me. This place, with its peeling paint and cracked sidewalk, felt like a testament to my failures. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet. "I really appreciate it, don't mention it," he replied, his eyes meeting mine. For a brief moment, his gaze softened, the assessing quality replaced by something warmer, something that felt unervingly like empathy. Hang in there. I got out and watched as he pulled away, the truck's taillights disappearing around the corner. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the keys to my silent apartment heavy in my hand. I had just trespassed on the property of the most influential man in town, and instead of being thrown out, I had been driven home. I felt the worn edges of the photograph in my wallet. The encounter had shifted something. The distant landmark had become a man with a quiet voice and kind eyes. And that, I realized with a fresh jolt of panic, was far more dangerous. The next morning, I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The reality of my situation had settled in overnight. No car meant a 2-mile walk to work, a 2-mile walk back. It meant groceries had to be carried, trips to the laundromat planned with military precision. It felt like my already small world had shrunk even further. The encounter with Arthur Vance felt like a dream, a strange, surreal interlude in an otherwise bleak landscape. I was sure I would never speak to him again. I was just the lost kid he'd given a ride to. I was wrong. The phone at the print shop rang around 10 o'clock. My boss, Mr. Henderson, a man whose mood was permanently set to curdled, answered it. I was in the back, wrestling with a jam in the large format printer, the air thick with the smell of ink and ozone. Leo, Henderson's voice barked through the shop. Front and center. Call for you, a call for me? No one ever called me here. My heart gave a nervous thump. I walked to the front counter, wiping my inky hands on a rag. Henderson held the receiver out to me, his expression a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Says his name is Vance, he muttered, as if the name itself were an accusation. I took the phone, my own hand suddenly clammy. This is Leo. Arthur Vance. The voice was unmistakable, low and steady, and it sent a strange warmth spreading through my chest. I hope I'm not interrupting your work. No, not at all, I said, trying to keep my voice even, acutely aware of Henderson hovering nearby. Good. I have a project, and I was hoping you could help me with it. I need some schematics printed, large scale. Several copies of each. It's for a restoration I'm working on. The originals are old and fragile, he paused. I was impressed with your calm demeanor yesterday under unusual circumstances. You seem like someone who pays attention to detail. I was floored. He was offering me work. Not just work for the shop, but work he specifically wanted me to handle. Of course, I managed to say. We can definitely do that. Excellent. I'll need you to come by the yard to pick up the originals. And I'll probably need to consult with you as the prints are being made. Would that be possible? My mind was racing. This meant I'd have to go back to the Boatyard. I'd have to see him again, talk to him. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. Yes, that's fine. I can walk over on my lunch break. No need for that, he said quickly. I'll send a car for you. 1 o'clock, and before I could protest, he said, I'll see you then, Leo, and the line went dead. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. Henderson was staring at me. Arthur Vance is sending a car for you, he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. I just nodded, unable to form a coherent sentence. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. At precisely 1 o'clock, a clean, late-model sedan pulled up in front of the shop. The driver, a polite man in a polo shirt with the Vance Marine logo, opened the door for me. As I slid into the back seat, I felt like I was stepping into another life. The boatyard looked different in the bright light of day, less intimidating and more like a bustling hub of activity. The air hummed with the sound of sanders, the clang of metal on metal, and the shouts of workmen. The driver led me to a large, barn-like building I hadn't noticed before. This was Arthur's personal workshop. The space inside took my breath away. It was vast and orderly, with a soaring ceiling crisscrossed by wooden beams. Tools lined the walls on pegboards, each one clean and in its proper place. The air smelled of teak oil, sawdust, and the faint, clean scent of the sea. In the center of the workshop, dominating the space, was the hull of a magnificent wooden sailboat, its lines elegant and timeless. The starlight. Arthur was standing at a massive workbench, poring over a set of old, yellowed blueprints. He looked up as I entered, and a small smile touched the corners of his mouth. Leo, welcome. He was wearing a simple work apron over his clothes, and there was a smudge of wood dust on his cheek. He looked completely in his element, a master craftsman in his sanctuary. He gestured for me to come closer. These are the originals, he said, his voice softer in the cavernous space. They're from the 1930s. Delicate. I leaned over the workbench, my shoulder almost brushing his. I could feel the warmth radiating from him. The blueprints were beautiful, drawn by hand with an artist's precision. I could see why he needed careful copies. "These are incredible," I breathed. "She's a special boat," he said, his gaze shifting to the hull of the Starlight. There was a warmth in his eyes, a deep affection that was almost paternal. "She deserves to be brought back to her former glory." This became my new routine. Several times a week, I would go to the boatyard to consult with him. We'd stand side by side at the workbench, our heads bent over the schematics. He would point out a detail, his finger tracing a faint line, and I would make a note on the proofs. I became intimately familiar with the small things about him. The way he would chew on the inside of his cheek when he was deep in thought, the low, rumbling hum he made when he was pleased with a piece of work, the way the light from the high windows caught the silver in his hair. I learned to read his silences. He wasn't a man who used words wastefully. A nod of approval from him was worth more than a paragraph of praise from anyone else. A quiet, "Good work, Leo," would leave me feeling buoyed for the rest of the day. I was hyper-aware of everything. I analyzed every interaction, every small gesture, searching for meaning. When he handed me a bottle of cold water from the small fridge in his office, was it just a simple courtesy, or was it an act of care? When he held the door open for me, his hand brushing my back, was it an accident? I was driving myself crazy, caught in a loop of hope and doubt. The difference in our lives was a constant, unspoken presence. He lived in a world of quiet wealth and established purpose. His shirts were custom-tailored. His boots were expensive leather, worn soft with use. I was wearing jeans with a patch on the knee and counting the days until my next paycheck. I felt like an imposter in his well-ordered world, and I was terrified he would see through me, see the desperate, lonely man I was underneath the veneer of professional competence I tried so hard to project. Was this pity? Had he invented this project just to give the poor kid with the dead car something to do? The thought was a bitter pill, and I swallowed it down again and again. But his respect for my work felt genuine. He listened to my suggestions about paper weight and printing resolution with an intensity that made me feel valued. He treated me not as a subordinate, but as a collaborator. One afternoon, we were standing closer than usual, trying to decipher a faded notation on a particularly tricky blueprint. He leaned in, his arm pressing against mine. I could smell the clean, masculine scent of his soap, mixed with the ever-present aroma of sawdust. My breath hitched in my throat. "I think that says bronze fitting," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. A shiver traced its way down my spine. "Yes," I managed to squeak out, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "I think you're right." He pointed to the spot with his finger, and in doing so, his hand brushed against mine. It was the briefest of touches, skin against skin, but it felt like an electric shock. A current of pure, unadulterated want shot through me, so powerful it made me dizzy. I didn't pull my hand away. For a fraction of a second that stretched into an eternity, neither did he. Our hands rested there, side by side, his large and warm against my own. Then, slowly, he withdrew his hand and straightened up, clearing his throat. "Well," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual. "That solves that mystery." He didn't meet my eyes. The moment was over, but the space between us was now charged with a new, unspoken tension. Later that week, as I was packing up my proofs to leave, he walked with me to the workshop door. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. "Big storm coming in tomorrow night," he said, looking out at the sky. "We'll need to batten down the hatches. Stay safe," I said, turning to go. "Leo," I stopped and turned back. He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. The weight of it was grounding, substantial. His grip was firm but gentle. It wasn't a casual touch. It was deliberate, protective. "You drive safe," he said, his eyes holding mine. Then he seemed to remember I didn't have a car. A flicker of something, frustration, regret, crossed his face. "Be safe on your walk home." He let his hand fall away, but I could still feel the warmth of it on my shoulder long after I'd left the boatyard. The touch lingered, a phantom pressure that was both a comfort and a torment. It was a gesture that said more than all the words we hadn't spoken. It was a touch that felt perilously close to a claim. And the most terrifying part was how much I wanted it to be one. The storm arrived exactly as predicted, rolling in off the Atlantic with a fury that felt personal. The wind howled around the corners of my apartment building, and rain lashed against the windows in horizontal sheets. I sat in my small living room, listening to the weather reports on the radio, feeling profoundly isolated. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Hello, Leo? It's Arthur." His voice was slightly distorted by the wind and static, but it was him. "I know this is a long shot, but I'm in a bind." My heart started beating faster. "What's wrong?" "The main canvas for the Starlight. We need to get it secured before the worst of this hits. It's a huge, two-man job, and my usual guys are all out with the flu. I can't manage it alone." He paused. "I wouldn't ask, but I could really use an extra pair of hands." There was a vulnerability in his voice I had never heard before. He was asking for my help. Not as a patron, not as a client, but as one person needing another. "I'll be right there," I said, without a moment's hesitation. "I'll come and get you," he said immediately. "Don't even think about walking in this." 10 minutes later, his truck's headlights cut through the deluge outside my building. The ride to the boatyard was tense, the wind buffeting the truck, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the rain. When we arrived, the yard was a scene of controlled chaos. Loose items were tied down, and the wind whipped through the canyons between the boats with a mournful shriek. The canvas was a monster, a thick, heavy tarp the size of a small house. For the next 2 hours, we fought it. The wind caught it like a sail, threatening to rip it from our grasp or send us flying off the scaffolding. It was brutal, exhausting work. We were soaked to the skin within minutes, our clothes heavy with rain. But we worked together, a silent, efficient team. He'd shout an instruction over the roar of the wind, and I'd react instantly. I'd see a rope starting to slip, and he'd already be there to secure it. In the midst of that storm, fighting the elements side by side, the barriers between us seemed to dissolve. There was no wealthy boatyard owner and no broke print shop employee. There were just two men, working together, their survival and success completely dependent on the other. We were equals, bound by a shared purpose. Finally, the last rope was tied, the last corner secured. The great canvas was stretched taut over the delicate wooden hull of the Starlight, protecting her from the storm's rage. We stood there for a moment on the scaffolding, breathing heavily, the rain plastering our hair to our faces. He looked over at me, a rare, genuine grin spreading across his face. "We did it," he yelled over the wind. I grinned back, a feeling of pure, unadulterated triumph surging through me. "We did it." He led me to his small, private office at the back of the workshop. It was a warm, dry sanctuary from the storm. The room was simple and masculine, lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on naval architecture and maritime history. A single lamp cast a golden glow over a large oak desk. He disappeared into a small adjoining bathroom and came back with 2 thick, fluffy towels. "Here," he said, handing one to me. "Dry off before you catch your death." He began to towel his own hair dry, his movements brisk and efficient. I did the same, feeling a strange intimacy in the simple act. He then opened a locker and pulled out a thick, navy blue wool sweater. "Put this on. You're shivering." I stripped off my soaked shirt, my back to him, feeling suddenly self-conscious. I pulled the sweater over my head. It was warm and soft and smelled of him. A clean, comforting scent of cedar and wool and something uniquely Arthur. It enveloped me, a gentle embrace. He made us both coffee from a small machine in the corner, and we sat in 2 worn leather armchairs, nursing the hot mugs in our cold hands. The only sounds were the drumming of the rain on the roof and the howl of the wind outside. The storm felt a world away. We sat in a comfortable silence for a long time. The adrenaline from our fight with the canvas began to recede, leaving a pleasant exhaustion in its wake. Arthur stared into his mug, his expression thoughtful. The usual stoic mask was gone, replaced by something more open, more vulnerable. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet in the cozy room. "I worry," he began, not looking at me. He seemed to be choosing his words with immense care. "I worry that offering you the printing work, that it might seem transactional. Like I'm trying to buy your time." He lifted his head and met my gaze. His eyes were serious, searching. "I want you to know it isn't that. I needed the prints done right, and I trust you. Tonight, I just needed help." He took a slow breath. "I want to be clear about that. Your comfort in this arrangement is important to me." My heart squeezed in my chest. He was talking about the power imbalance. He was naming the elephant that had been in the room with us for weeks. He was acknowledging my potential discomfort, my vulnerability. It was an act of profound respect. He was giving me an out, a chance to say that this was too much, that the lines were getting too blurred. He was opening a door, but he was also showing me that it was unlocked, that I could walk away at any time without consequence. It doesn't feel transactional, Arthur, I said, my voice hoarse. It feels kinda small. Relieved smile touched his lips. Good, he said softly. That's all I intended. The moment stretched, filled with a new kind of intimacy, one born not of tension, but of understanding. He had seen my precariousness, and instead of exploiting it, he had taken care to protect it. He had seen me. And in that small, warm office, with the storm raging outside, I felt a sense of safety I hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of a quiet foundation settling into place, deep beneath the surface. The storm passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. But it had changed the weather between us, too. The unspoken had been touched upon, the dynamic acknowledged. Things felt clearer, but also more charged. The walk to work felt different now. I found myself looking for his truck, for a glimpse of him on the docks, with a new and more potent sense of anticipation. Life, however, has a cruel sense of timing. Just as this fragile new connection was beginning to feel real, the ground fell out from under me. A certified letter arrived in my mailbox. The kind of letter that is never good news. My apartment building had been sold. The new owners, a faceless corporation from out of state, were renovating. My rent was doubling, effective in 60 days. I read the letter 3 times, but the numbers didn't change. The new rent was an impossible figure, a cruel joke. There was no way I could afford it. I had 30 days to sign the new lease at the exorbitant rate, or 30 days to vacate. The choice was no choice at all. I had to leave. A cold, familiar panic set in. I spent the evening scouring online listings, my hope dwindling with each click. Everything in my price range was either miles out of town, an impossible distance without a car, or located in neighborhoods that were notoriously unsafe. The walls of my small apartment, my little fortress, suddenly felt like they were closing in, squeezing the air from my lungs. I was going to be homeless. I tried to hide it. I went to the Boatyard the next day, determined to act as if nothing was wrong. I pasted a smile on my face and tried to focus on the schematics, but my mind was a chaotic buzz of fear and numbers. I was clumsy, dropping a roll of prints, my hands shaking as I tried to re-roll them. Arthur noticed. Of course, he noticed. He didn't miss anything. He didn't say a word, but I felt his gaze on me, steady and concerned. He saw the tension in my shoulders, the dark circles under my eyes, the way my focus kept drifting. He made us coffee and steered the conversation to neutral topics, a subtle act of kindness that almost made me break down. That evening, I couldn't bear the thought of going back to my apartment, to the letter that felt like a death sentence. I found myself down at the public docks, sitting on the edge of a pier, my legs dangling over the dark water. The sea was calm after the storm, the surface like black glass reflecting the first stars. I just sat there, hollowed out, watching the tide slowly recede. I heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the wooden planks behind me, but I didn't turn. I knew who it was. He sat down beside me, not too close, leaving a respectful space between us. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the lights of the town twinkle across the water. "You're 1,000 miles away tonight, Leo," he said finally, his voice a low rumble in the quiet air. I didn't answer right away. I just shrugged, unable to find the words. "Talk to me," he said gently. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. And so I told him. The words came out in a rush, a torrent of fear and frustration about the letter, the rent, the impossible math of my life. I told him everything, the whole pathetic story. When I finished, I felt empty, ashamed of laying my burdens at his feet. He was silent for what felt like an eternity, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I braced myself for pity, for a polite but distant expression of sympathy. What he said next completely blindsided me. "There's a small caretaker's cottage on my property," he said, his voice measured and calm. "Up on the bluff, overlooking the water. It's been empty for years." He turned to look at me, his expression serious. "You could stay there. No rent. Just keep an eye on things for me." The world stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at him, my mind unable to process the offer. It was too much. It was charity. The word blared like a siren in my head. I felt the old defensive walls slam into place, high and thick. I must have had a look of horror on my face, because his own expression tightened. "It's not a handout, Leo," he said, his voice firm but still gentle, as if he could read my thoughts. "It's an offer, a practical solution to a temporary problem. You can say no. Your answer changes nothing between us." He paused, and his next words were delivered with a quiet intensity that struck me to the core. "I just don't want to see you out on the street between us." He had said it. He had named the connection, the invisible thread that had been weaving itself between us for weeks. He was making it explicit. This wasn't just about a housing problem anymore. This was about something more. I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his offer, by the hope and the fear and the pride all warring inside me. It was a lifeline, but taking it felt like surrendering the last vestiges of my independence. I stood up, needing to put some distance between us, needing to breathe. I walked to the edge of the pier, my hands gripping the rough wooden railing. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, directed more at the dark water than at him. "Why are you doing this, Arthur?" I heard him stand and walk up behind me. I could feel his presence, a solid warmth at my back. He didn't touch me. "Because for the last month," he said, his voice low and steady, right behind my ear, "watching you walk past my boat at the end of the day has been the best part of my day." My knuckles went white on the railing. "Because when you got lost in my boatyard, it felt less like an intrusion and more like you'd finally found your way home." He took a small step closer. I could feel the heat of his body, could smell the faint scent of salt and cedar that clung to him. "Because I care about what happens to you, Leo." He let the words hang in the air, simple and profound. "Is that plain enough?" My breath hitched. The entire world narrowed to the space between us, to the cool night air and the warmth of his body. The sounds of the harbor, the distant traffic, the gentle lapping of the water, it all faded away into a dull hum. There was only the weight of his gaze, the quiet sincerity in his voice, the truth of his words settling into my bones. I turned around slowly to face him. He was standing so close I could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the deep lines of kindness etched around them. This steady, capable man, this pillar of the community, was laying his feelings bare for me. He was taking a risk, a far greater one than I was. He was offering not just a home, but a part of himself. I couldn't speak. The words were lodged in my throat, a thick knot of emotion. I could only nod, a small, jerky movement. A silent yes. Yes to the cottage. Yes to his care. Yes to everything that was unspoken between us. Relief, profound and immediate, washed over his features. He raised a hand, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every possible chance to pull back, to change my mind. He didn't. He gently cupped my jaw, his calloused thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was not one of possession, but of reverence. It was a question, and my stillness was the answer. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. The kiss was nothing like I had imagined, and everything I didn't know I needed. It wasn't hungry or demanding, not filled with the desperate passion I had known before. It was quiet. It was sure. It was a confirmation. His lips were soft, firm, and they tasted of salt from the sea air and the faint, lingering taste of coffee. It was a kiss that spoke of patience, of a long-held breath finally being released. It felt like coming home. When we broke apart, the air between us was thick with unspoken emotion. He didn't pull away completely. Instead, he rested his forehead against mine, our eyes closed. I could feel his breath, warm and steady, on my lips. He reached for my hand, and our fingers laced together, a perfect, natural fit. His hand was large and strong around mine, a silent promise of shelter, of steadiness. We stood like that for a long time, under the vast, starry sky, the quiet harbor our only witness. In that moment, the fear that had been my constant companion for so long finally, blessedly, went silent. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of logistics. Arthur was a man of quiet efficiency. He arranged for a moving truck. He helped me pack the few boxes of my meager belongings. He never once made me feel like a charity case. He worked alongside me, his presence a calm, reassuring constant. The cottage was more than I could have ever imagined. It was nestled on a small bluff on the edge of his property, set back from the main house, and shielded by a grove of old pine trees. It was small, just a living area with a kitchenette, a bedroom, and a bathroom, but it was perfect. The entire front was a wall of windows, with a small porch that looked out over the endless expanse of the ocean. It was clean and sparsely furnished, a blank slate. It was a haven. But as the initial relief and excitement wore off, a new kind of unease began to creep in. I was living on his land, in his cottage. Every morning, I would walk down the winding path to his main house, and we would have breakfast together in his large, sun-filled kitchen. He was a perfect gentleman, always thoughtful, always respectful. But a careful distance had settled between us since that night on the pier. The kiss had happened. It was a real and solid memory, but it felt like we were both holding our breath, unsure of the next step. I was terrified. I was living in a gilded cage, no matter how beautiful it was. I was the younger man, the one with no money, no prospects, living on the property of a wealthy, established older man. I knew how it looked. I could hear the whispers before they even started. I started to retreat into myself, the old habits of isolation dying hard. I insisted on buying groceries. He gently refused, saying the house was always stocked. I tried to pay him for the moving truck. He waved it away as a business expense. Each refusal, however kind, felt like another link in a chain of dependency that was wrapping itself around me. I felt the panic rising again, a different kind this time. The fear of being homeless was replaced by the fear of being kept. One evening, about a week after I'd moved in, he found me at the print shop. I had stayed late, manufacturing work that didn't need doing, just to avoid going back to the cottage, to the complicated reality of my new life. He walked in carrying a large paper bag that smelled deliciously of Thai food. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, his expression unreadable. We ate sitting on stacks of printing paper, the containers balanced on our laps. The shop was quiet and dark, the big machines sleeping around us. For a while, we ate in silence. Then he put his food down and looked at me, his gaze direct and serious. "We need to talk about this, Leo." I braced myself. "About what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "About you," he said. "About us. I see you pulling away. I feel it. You're here, but you're not really here. You're hiding in this print shop." He wasn't accusing. He was just stating a fact. "I don't want you to feel trapped. That's the last thing I want." He took a deep breath. "So, we're going to set some ground rules. First, the cottage. It is your space. It is yours for as long as you need it, whether we are this or not." He gestured between us. "Your housing is not conditional on our relationship. Your independence is not up for negotiation." I stared at him, my throat tight. "Second," he continued, "you are going to pay rent." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "You will pay me $100 a month. A token amount. An amount you can easily afford. I am going to open a separate bank account, and that money will go into it. It will be your money. A savings account, so that you know, every single day, that you are standing on your own 2 feet, and that you have a safety net that you built yourself." I was speechless. It was an act of such profound understanding, such deep respect for my pride and my fear. He had seen straight through to the heart of my anxiety and had systematically dismantled it. He wasn't trying to own me. He was trying to empower me. He reached across the space between us and placed his hand on mine, his fingers warm and firm. "I'm in this for you, Leo," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Not for what I can do for you. I need you to believe that." Tears pricked at my eyes, and I blinked them back fiercely. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." He gave my hand a gentle squeeze and then let go, picking up his container of noodles as if the entire conversation had been a simple business negotiation. But it wasn't. It was a reassurance. It was the moment the foundation that had settled in the storm became solid stone. A few weeks later, the inevitable happened. Life in a small town is lived in a fishbowl. On a Saturday morning, I had stayed the night in the main house with Arthur. It was still new, this intimacy, a slow and careful exploration. I left early to walk back to my cottage, enjoying the crisp morning air. As I came down the long, winding driveway, I saw Carol Gable, the town's most notorious gossip, putting out her mail. She saw me. Her eyes widened, and she gave me a look that was a potent mixture of surprise and acidic speculation. The whispers started almost immediately. I heard them at the grocery store, felt them in the way people's eyes lingered on me at the post office. The narrative was as old as time. The poor young man and his rich, older benefactor. It was ugly and reductive, and it stung more than I wanted to admit. The following weekend, Arthur suggested we go for breakfast at the Salty Dog, the town's main diner. A part of me wanted to refuse, to hide, but I saw the quiet resolve in his eyes. This was not something he was going to run from. So I agreed. The moment we walked in, the diner went quiet. Every eye was on us. We took a booth by the window, and I focused on studying the menu as if it were the most fascinating document I'd ever read. Mrs. Gable was there, of course, holding court in a large booth with her cronies. Her voice carried across the room. "Some people just land on their feet, don't they?" she said, not even bothering to be subtle. "Must be nice to have a generous patron." I froze, my face burning with humiliation. My fork clattered against my plate. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. Arthur didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. It was a simple gesture, but in the charged atmosphere of the diner, it was a public declaration. A quiet, undeniable claim. He then looked directly over at Carol Gable's table. He didn't glare. His expression was calm, almost placid. But his voice, when he spoke, was clear and carried easily across the room. "Leo is my partner, Carol," he said, his tone perfectly level. "I would appreciate it if you would show him the same respect you show me." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Gable's face turned a blotchy red, and she suddenly became very interested in her coffee cup. No one said another word. Arthur turned back to me, gave my hand another gentle squeeze, and said, "Now, are you having the pancakes or the omelet?" He had defended me. He had defined us. He had done it publicly, without shame or apology. In that moment, sitting in the cheap vinyl booth of the Salty Dog Diner, I had never felt so protected, so seen, so loved. The whispers of the town didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the steady warmth of his hand on mine. That morning at the diner was a turning point. Arthur's quiet, firm declaration had drawn a line in the sand. It didn't stop all the gossip, of course, but it changed the tenor of it. We were no longer a secret to be whispered about. We were a fact to be accepted. And in that acceptance, something in me settled. The shame I'd been carrying, the fear of judgment, began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet pride. We started to build a life together, consciously and with great care. We established routines that honored both our connection and my independence. I still worked at the print shop, but the job no longer felt like a dead end. It was a part of my life, not the whole of it. Arthur, noticing my fascination with the boat schematics, encouraged me to take some online courses in marine design and drafting. He set up a drafting table for me in a corner of his workshop, my own small space in his world. He was not just my partner, he was my champion. The boundaries we'd established became the framework of our relationship. The cottage remained my sanctuary, the one place that was unequivocally mine. But more and more, I found myself choosing to be in the main house. In the shared space that was slowly becoming ours, we learned each other's rhythms, the small, domestic habits that make up a life. I learned that he liked his coffee black and his toast slightly burnt. He learned that I couldn't sleep without the window cracked open, even in winter, just to hear the sound of the water. It was a slow, deliberate process, like the restoration of the starlight herself. We were carefully sanding away the old layers of fear and isolation, revealing the strong, beautiful grain of what lay beneath. It wasn't a passionate, all-consuming fire. It was a steady, warm hearth, a place of comfort and enduring light. One Saturday morning, I woke up in his bed. The early morning sun was streaming through the large bedroom windows, painting stripes of gold across the white duvet. The room overlooked the bay, and the water was a sheet of shimmering silver. Arthur was already awake, propped up on one elbow, just watching me. There was no scrutiny in his gaze, no possession. There was just a soft, wondering look, as if he couldn't quite believe I was real. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. I no longer felt like a guest in his house, an intruder in his life. I felt like I belonged. We went downstairs to the kitchen. He started the coffee while I pulled out a carton of eggs. We moved around each other in an easy, familiar dance, not needing to speak. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of shared understanding, of a deep and abiding comfort. His large, beautiful kitchen, which had once seemed so intimidating, now just felt like a room where we made breakfast. It felt like our kitchen, We ate on the wide porch that wrapped around the house, watching the first sailboats of the day catch the morning breeze. The air was cool and smelled of salt and pine. Arthur reached over and took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. We just sat, together, watching the world wake up. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. It was quiet, simple, and domestic. And it felt more real, more like arrival, than any grand gesture ever could. As I sat there, the warm sun on my face and his hand holding mine, I thought back to the man I was just a few short months ago. The lonely, adrift young man who walked the shoreline, always looking in from the outside. The man who was so afraid of sinking that he never dared to leave the safety of the harbor. Arthur's wealth and his age, the things that had once seemed like insurmountable barriers, had not disappeared. They were still part of our story, but they had become context, not a cage. His resources had given me a safe place to land, but he had taken meticulous care to ensure I never felt owned by them. His age had given him a wisdom and a patience that had allowed me the space to heal, to find my own footing. He hadn't saved me. That's not what this was. He had thrown me a line, a sturdy, reliable rope. But I was the one who had to choose to grab it. I was the one who had to learn to tie the knots. He had provided a safe harbor, but I was the one learning to navigate these new, hopeful waters. I looked at him, at the quiet strength in his profile as he watched the boats, and a wave of gratitude so immense it almost hurt washed over me. I was no longer just watching from the shore. I was casting off, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt the steady, reassuring weight of an anchor. I felt home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.